$5 trillion. That's what two empires spent fighting a war that never involved a single soldier. This is the economic battlefield nobody teaches you about. Rome and Han China, two superpowers, same time period. They never met face to face. But for 400 years they waged the most expensive trade war in human history. The weapon? Gold. The battlefield? 7,000 miles of desert. The prize? Control of the world's first global economy. And both empires went bankrupt trying to win. I'm going to show you exactly how this happened. Using archaeological evidence, Chinese records, and Roman financial documents, the pattern is undeniable, and it's happening again right now. This isn't theory. This is mathematics. When you spend more gold than you earn, you eventually run out. Rome ran out, China ran out, the empires in between ran out, all of them, within 50 years of each other. Let's start with a number that should shock you. 50 tons of gold. That's how much Rome was losing every single year, not to war, not to corruption, to silk. Every year, Roman ships loaded with gold left Alexandria. They sailed to India. Indian merchants took that gold and sent it east to China. The gold never came back. The Roman historian Pliny complained about this in 77 AD. He wrote that India, China, and Arabia were draining Rome of 100 million sesterces annually. That's 50 tons of pure gold. Pliny called it a catastrophe. He said Roman women were bankrupting the empire with their addiction to silk and pearls. He wasn't being dramatic. He was documenting economic collapse in real time. In modern terms, adjusting for purchasing power, we're talking about $5 billion per year, just on silk, spices and luxury goods from the East, for 4 centuries straight. But here's what makes this fascinating. The Han Dynasty was doing the exact same thing. Chinese emperors were spending enormous sums trying to control the western end of the trade route. They needed Roman gold. Rome needed Chinese silk. Neither empire could stop. And that's the pattern. When two economic superpowers become dependent on each other's goods, the one with the trade surplus wins, until the deficit empire collapses. The Silk Road wasn't one road. It was a network of routes spanning 7,000 miles, from Rome's eastern border to the Han capital at Chang'an. Nobody travelled the full distance. Instead, goods passed through dozens of middlemen, each one taking their cut. This is where the real money was made, not in Rome or China, but in between. The Parthian Empire sat right in the middle. Modern-day Iran. They controlled the central section of the Silk Road. And they became extraordinarily wealthy from tariffs alone. Parthian merchants charged Rome 25% tariffs on Chinese goods. Then they charged China tariffs on Roman goods. They were making money on both ends. Genius economics, devastating for the empires. Archaeological evidence shows Parthian cities exploding in wealth during this period. Ctesiphon became one of the richest cities in the world. Not from production, from tariffs, pure middleman profit. Here's the mechanism. A bolt of Chinese silk cost 1 ounce of gold in Chang'an. By the time it reached Rome, that same bolt cost 12 ounces. The Parthians were marking it up 1,200%. Roman aristocrats didn't care. They had to have silk. It became a status symbol. Wearing silk meant you were part of the elite. The demand was insatiable. The supply was controlled by one empire 7,000 miles away. Senators' wives wore silk to the theatre. Emperors wore silk togas. Even soldiers started demanding silk as part of their pay. The addiction spread through every level of Roman society. Nobody could stop it. The Romans tried to break the monopoly multiple times. Emperor Nero sent expeditions to find a sea route to China. They failed. Emperor Trajan tried to conquer Parthia just to eliminate the middlemen. He failed too. In 66 AD, Roman merchants finally reached the Han court directly. Chinese records document this. They called the Romans Da Qin and recorded detailed observations about their appearance and customs. But it was too late. By then, both empires were in economic trouble. The trade imbalance had been bleeding them for 2 centuries. Rome's gold reserves were depleted. Han China's western expansion had bankrupted their treasury. Now let me show you the evidence that proves this wasn't just expensive. It was fatal. I've linked all sources in the description. This is from archaeological excavations and financial records. Archaeologists found Roman coins across Central Asia, thousands of them, dating from 100 BC to 300 AD. They traced the flow of gold eastward along the Silk Road. The pattern is undeniable. In Uzbekistan alone, they found over 2,000 Roman coins. In Afghanistan, 1,500 more. In western China, hundreds of Roman aureus gold coins, all flowing east, none flowing back. Cambridge historians calculated the total value of trade along the Silk Road during this period. The number is staggering. $5 trillion in modern purchasing power. That's more than the GDP of modern Japan. Here's the critical detail. 90% of that value flowed from Rome to China. The trade balance was completely one-sided. Rome imported luxury goods. China imported gold. That's it. Warwick Ball's research on Rome's eastern trade shows something devastating. By 200 AD, Rome had lost over 60% of its gold reserves to eastern trade. 60% in 200 years. The Han Dynasty wasn't immune either. Their military campaigns to secure the Western Silk Road cost them 30 million taels of silver. That's 60,000 tons. For comparison, that's more than modern Spain's entire gold reserves. Both empires tried the same solution. They debased their currency. Rome reduced the silver content in their coins from 95% to 50%. The Han did the same thing. Inflation destroyed both economies. Here's where it gets dangerous. This exact pattern is happening today. The United States has run a trade deficit with China for 40 years, $8 trillion total. Counting. In 2022 alone, the U.S. trade deficit with China was $368 billion. That's more than the entire GDP of Denmark, every single year, for decades, just like Rome and Han. In 2023, the deficit was $366 billion. 2024 projections show $375 billion. The number keeps growing, the pattern keeps accelerating, the mathematics haven't changed in 2,000 years. The mechanism is identical. America imports manufactured goods. China accumulates dollars. China uses those dollars to buy American debt. America borrows more. The cycle continues until something breaks. The difference is this. Rome's economy was based on gold. There's only so much gold. Modern economies use fiat currency. There's theoretically infinite supply. But that doesn't mean infinite value. When Rome ran out of gold, they couldn't import anymore. The economy crashed. When America runs out of credibility, the dollar crashes. Different mechanism. Same outcome. Economic collapse. Both the Roman Empire and Han Dynasty collapsed in the same 50-year period. 3rd century AD. Historians debate the causes, but the economic crisis from trade imbalances shows up in every account. The Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. The Han Dynasty collapsed in 220 AD. Different continents. Similar timeline. Both empires had depleted their treasuries fighting to control or access the Silk Road. Between the Han collapse and Rome's fall, the Mediterranean and Chinese economies went through 250 years of chaos. Trade routes fragmented, cities depopulated, literacy rates crashed. The Dark Ages began. And here's the part that should concern you. The Parthians, who sat in the middle and collected tariffs, also collapsed in 224 AD. Because when both of your trading partners go bankrupt, your tariff revenue disappears. Modern logistics companies should pay attention. FedEx, Maersk and DHL all depend on global trade volume. If the US-China trade war escalates to economic decoupling, these middlemen lose both revenue streams. Exactly like Parthia. So what do we learn from this? 3 things. First, trade imbalances always correct, either through policy changes or through collapse. There's no third option. History proves this repeatedly. Every empire that ran sustained trade deficits eventually collapsed economically. Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Rome, Han, Ming China. The pattern is unbroken. The mathematics are unforgiving. You cannot import more than you export indefinitely. Second, the middlemen who control trade routes become incredibly wealthy in the short term. Then they collapse when the trade system fails. Dependence on tariffs is not a stable economic model, never has been. Third, luxury imports can bankrupt empires. When your citizens become addicted to foreign goods you can't produce domestically, you lose control of your economy. Rome couldn't make silk, they paid the price. Modern America can't manufacture most of its consumer goods. We outsource production to China. Now we're dependent, same pattern, different century. The math is already working against us. 72% of antibiotics used in America are manufactured in China. 90% of rare earth elements come from China. 80% of solar panels are Chinese-made. This isn't trade, this is dependency. Chinese economic planners study Roman history. This isn't speculation, it's documented. They specifically analyze how Rome's trade deficit with the East contributed to imperial decline. They know the pattern. The Belt and Road Initiative is China's modern Silk Road. They're rebuilding the same trade network. But this time they're in the position of the ancient Parthians, controlling the routes, collecting the tariffs. Over 60 countries have joined. China is financing infrastructure projects worth over $1 trillion. They're not doing this out of generosity. They're building economic dependence, just like the Parthian merchants did 2,000 years ago. Pakistan owes China $85 billion, Sri Lanka $8 billion, Kenya $9 billion, Djibouti $1.4 billion. When countries can't repay, China takes control of strategic assets. Ports, railways, highways. Here's the evidence from Stanford's archaeology department. They've mapped ancient trade flows and compared them to modern supply chains. The routes are almost identical. The economics are almost identical. The only difference is scale. Rome's economy was worth maybe $100 billion in modern terms. America's economy is worth $25 trillion. When it corrects, the impact will be proportionally larger. Some economists argue that modern financial systems are more sophisticated. We have central banks. We have floating currencies. We have international trade agreements. Therefore we're immune to ancient patterns. But Rome had sophisticated trade agreements too. They had banking systems. They had international currency exchange markets. They had all the tools. It didn't save them from basic economic mathematics. If you spend more than you earn, eventually you go bankrupt. This is true for individuals, it's true for families, it's true for corporations, and it's true for empires. The scale changes, the principle doesn't. Between 100 BC and 300 AD, Rome transferred 60% of their gold reserves eastward. They knew it was happening. Pliny wrote about it. Senators debated it. They couldn't stop it, because stopping it meant giving up silk. Giving up silk meant admitting Rome couldn't compete with Eastern manufacturing. It meant accepting that Roman citizens preferred foreign goods to domestic products. Politically impossible. Economically fatal. They chose the politically easy path. America faces the same choice right now. Continue running massive trade deficits to maintain cheap consumer goods, or restructure the economy to produce more domestically at higher costs. It's a political nightmare, but the math doesn't care about politics. The Han Dynasty made the opposite mistake. They spent their treasury trying to control the western trade routes militarily. They won territories, they lost money. Military control of trade routes costs more than the tariff revenue generates. The Han expansion under Emperor Wu cost them 2/3 of their annual revenue for 20 years straight. They conquered Central Asian territories. They established military colonies. They built fortifications along the Silk Road. They went bankrupt doing it. Emperor Wu sent General Zhangqian west in 38 BC to find allies against nomadic tribes. Zhang spent 13 years exploring Central Asia. He returned with detailed reports about Western kingdoms and trade opportunities. The Han invested massively based on his intelligence. They built garrisons every 100 miles along the trade routes. Each garrison cost money. Each soldier needed supplies. The expenses never stopped. The return on investment never materialized. Modern China is smarter. Instead of military conquest, they're using debt. The Belt and Road Initiative loans money to developing countries for infrastructure projects. When those countries can't repay, China takes ownership of the infrastructure. Debt colonialism. Sri Lanka couldn't repay their port development loan. China took a 99-year lease on Hambantota port. Pakistan's Gwadar port is under Chinese control for 40 years. 43 countries in the Belt and Road Programme are at risk of debt default. This is exactly how the Parthian Empire operated. They didn't conquer territory. They controlled trade routes through economic leverage. They loaned money to merchants. When merchants couldn't repay, Parthians took ownership of caravans and trade goods. The pattern is self-reinforcing until it breaks. Rome needed silk, China needed gold, Parthia needed both to keep trading. When one empire started declining, the whole system destabilized. Within 50 years, all three had collapsed. Today's version. America needs manufactured goods. China needs dollars and markets. The countries in between need both. If America's economy crashes, China loses their largest customer. If China stops producing, America's store shelves are empty. The interconnection creates temporary stability. But it also means that when one link breaks, the entire chain fails. Economists call this systemic risk. Historians call it inevitable. Mathematically, it's the same thing. Think about 2008. Lehman Brothers collapsed. Within weeks, the global financial system was on the edge of total failure. Banks in London froze. Factories in China shut down. Supply chains in America stopped. One link broke. The whole chain seized. Nobody could stop the Roman Han trade war because both populations were addicted to the imports. Roman aristocrats would rather bankrupt the empire than give up silk. Chinese emperors would rather deplete the treasury than lose access to Roman glassware and exotic goods. Sound familiar? American consumers would rather go into debt than give up cheap electronics and clothing from China. Chinese manufacturers would rather accept paper dollars than shut down their factories. Neither side can exit without pain. The Roman solution was currency debasement. Under Emperor Nero, they reduced silver content in coins from 95% to 93%. Sounds small, but it started a cascade. By 270 AD, Roman coins were less than 5% silver. Inflation destroyed the currency. Inflation destroyed savings. Inflation destroyed the middle class. By the time Rome realized what they'd done, it was too late to reverse. The mathematical momentum was unstoppable. Debasement creates more debasement. America started the same process in 1971 when Nixon ended the gold standard. Since then, the dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power. The Federal Reserve printed $16 trillion since 2008. Debasement. Different method. Same result. In 2020 alone, the Fed printed $4 trillion. More money created in 1 year than in the first 200 years of American history combined. The M2 money supply increased by 26% in 12 months. Unprecedented. Unsustainable. The Han Dynasty tried price controls instead. When inflation from military spending hit the silk industry, They froze prices by imperial decree. It didn't work. Black markets emerged. Smuggling increased. Official trade collapsed. Merchants hoarded goods rather than sell at government-mandated prices. Farmers stopped producing silk because the profit margin disappeared. The official economy contracted. The underground economy exploded. Classic unintended consequences. Price controls never work. Rome tried them too under Emperor Diocletian. He issued the edict on maximum prices in 3001 AD. It listed maximum prices for over 1,000 goods. Merchants stopped selling rather than sell at a loss. Shortages everywhere. Every empire thinks they're different. Every empire thinks they've solved the problems that destroyed their predecessors. And every empire follows the same patterns anyway. Because the mathematics of economics don't change. Only the currency does. So what should you take from this? First, understand that trade imbalance is always correct. The only question is whether the correction happens gradually through policy or suddenly through collapse. Rome chose collapse. We still can choose policy. Second, dependency on foreign manufacturing is a national security risk. Rome couldn't make silk. When the trade routes were disrupted during political instability, they had no alternatives. Empty markets, riots, collapse, manufacturing independence matters. Third, currency debasement is always a trap. It provides temporary relief from debt, but it destroys savings and purchasing power. Once you start, stopping is politically impossible. Rome debased for 200 years until their currency was worthless. The Silk Road trade war destroyed 3 empires: the Roman Empire, the Han Dynasty, the Parthian Empire, all within 50 years of each other, because their economies were interconnected. When one fell, the others followed. History doesn't repeat. But it rhymes in dollar signs. The same trade patterns that destroyed ancient empires are active right now. The same mathematical principles apply. The same warning signs are flashing. We just call it globalization instead of the Silk Road. If $5 trillion over 4 centuries bankrupted the ancient world, what will $40 trillion over 4 decades do to the modern world? We're about to find out, because unlike Rome and Han, we can't just retreat to our borders and rebuild. The global economy is too interconnected, supply chains are too complex, financial systems are too linked. When the trade war between America and China finally corrects, it won't just affect 2 countries, it will affect everyone, just like last time. Rome fell in 476 AD. The Han collapsed in 220. Parthia ended in 224. 3 empires, 1 trade system. Total systemic failure. The question isn't whether modern trade imbalances will correct. The question is how much damage the correction will cause. All sources are linked in the description. The archaeological evidence is undeniable. The economic patterns are identical. The mathematics are unforgiving. The only variable is timing. And history suggests we don't have much of it left. If this information shifted your perspective on modern economics, subscribe. Because next video, I'm breaking down how Rome's tax system created a black market worth 30% of their GDP, and why America's tax code is following the exact same pattern. History's patterns decoded through evidence. That's what we do here. You now understand the $5 trillion trade war that destroyed 3 empires. Use this knowledge, because the same war is happening again, and you're living in it